Okay, so I have decided that I will do a faction overview of the two factions that were not in the vanilla version of the mod but have been added by the overhaul, and I probably will go through each of the factions again because quite a lot of them have got some pretty fundamental changes. So I will set up a scenario and we'll try out the first of the new factions, which is Dunland. Okay, so Dunland are a faction that was added by the overhaul mod, and they are quite the faction with a tendency towards aggression. Now, I will be testing them in a slightly different way. I have only made it a 1v1, but I've given the AI a significant amount of tools they can use against me, so we'll see how well Dunland will do. And actually, in the overhaul mod, being aggressive is slightly more viable because the units are a little bit more survivable all round. The shock infantry is quite a bit better in the submod. So Dunland do benefit a bit from being an aggressive faction. The only problem that I would say is that compared to some of the higher tier factions, some of their units are a little bit underwhelming. But nonetheless, they do have options pretty much everywhere. They don't have too many units available. Like, to give you an example of a faction that has a lot of units available, Gondor actually has a scroll bar now because they have so many units. But nonetheless, Dunland do have all the important things. So let's go through their units one by one. We'll start off with the Tribal Axemen. Now these guys are a low tier unit naturally. 300 florins. Like, a lot of the low tier units are extremely cheap in the submod, so these guys are no exception. They've got 200 men in their unit, so they do have a lot of them. It's going to take quite a bit of time to get through them all, but their stats are not particularly fantastic. The defense of all the units in the submod honestly is pretty high, so 10 is slightly below average, I'd say. But nonetheless, they can be useful if you're in a lower funds game, although in the submod I doubt you'll ever be in a lower funds game because some factions would be made impossible to play in a lower funds game. But nonetheless, effective against armor, so they're not completely useless. They could be used as a meat shield in a siege as well if you wanted to spend a bit more money on your higher tier units, but yeah, not the most useful unit they have. Moving on to the Clansmen. Now these guys are spears, so they do have some utility there in the fact that they can be used to ward off cav. They can do skill trom as well, so if you're in a defensive siege, you might want to use these guys as a sort of first line of defense. But again, they're even cheaper, 270. But I would say you're more likely to find a use for the Clansmen than you are for the Tribal Axemen. However, the Dunland Spearmen are probably the spears you're going to want to use over the Clansmen because they're basically slightly better in every way for a little bit more money. They have better armor. They can actually form shield wall, which is quite interesting. These guys can form a pretty damn good formation for such a cheap unit. There are less in the unit, but if you're in a siege, these guys might be ideal for holding the line, to be honest with you. So probably going to need to use these guys in most armies you build, because even in a pitch battle, you're going to need something to ward off cav, because you don't have much cav of your own. So these guys will probably be the ideal solution to that. Next up we have the Dunherd Champions. Now these guys are a javelin unit, and javelins got buffed pretty significantly in this submod. Their missile damage is pretty damn high across the board, and these guys are no exception. They have 11, which is stronger than any archer unit in the game, including the elven ones, I believe. I think 10 is the highest missile damage you can get in the submod for any composite bows. They also have pretty decent stats in melee. They pull out a big club when they go into melee. There aren't many of them, so really you're going to want to use these guys for their missile damage and then use them as a sort of makeshift infantry unit. If I had to compare them to a unit we've already seen, it would be the Haradrim Muhard Tribesmen. They're kind of that role is what they're going to be fulfilling. They're going to be good against infantry lines. If you want to tip the balance of a fight on an infantry line in your favor, these guys are going to be the best thing to do it. They're not armor piercing, I don't believe, which means they're not going to be the best thing to use against something like Olag High. They're also vulnerable to archers, and naturally their range is very good, so you're going to want to keep them safe if at all possible. Very good in a siege, undoubtedly, but in a pitch battle you're going to need to be a little bit more careful with how you use them. Now we have the Chieftain's Bodyguards. This is, of course, the General's Bodyguard units. The General Bodyguard units, I think, have gotten a little bit more effective in this submod as well. They're not so useless anymore. These, I believe they have the best stats of any unit in Dunland's faction, I think, for infantry. Their defense is very high at 25. Their attack and charge score are kind of, mediocre, but they are a sword and shield infantry, so that's to be expected. There's only 75 in the unit, but again, their stats make up for it because they are pretty significantly the best infantry unit that Dunland have. Chances are you're only going to be using one though, because again, 75, you're going to want numbers on your side as Dunland, so you're only going to really want to use one. Next we have probably the most effective all-round unit that Dunland have in the Eisenmach Axemen. They are shock infantry, naturally, big axe. They're pretty similar in many ways to something like the Riddermark axes of Rohan, but they are probably more of an integral part to Dunland. Like, you're going to need to use them because they have good stats all round. They have 10 attack, 17 defense, and 5 charge. These are all pretty good stats for this mod. 17 defense in particular for a shock infantry is very nice. They are expensive, however. 1200 is a lot, but this is the only place in your army you're going to be spending a significant amount of money, really, because the highest it goes apart from that is into the 700s, so it's worth getting, and you can also have 4 before the cost increases, and even then it's only by 100 each time. So the cost of these guys, while it may look expensive initially, you're still going to be getting a lot more value for money than the majority of other factions in this submod, except for the Orcs, of course. They will get more value than Dunland, but that's to be expected. Now we'll be moving on to the composite bows of Dunland, the Dunland Hunters. Now, really the only thing that you're going to be looking for here is the missile score, because in melee, these guys are not particularly fantastic. They're wearing basically a vest, a leather vest, so they're not going to be the most durable. The missile score is only 3. Now, that's not brilliant, and their melee stats obviously are not particularly fantastic. They're also vulnerable to enemy missiles. So while they are kind of cheap, I would suggest you shy away from these guys because you're not going to be winning any skirmish battles with Dunland. You're really going to be using limited archers just to support your infantry fight, and honestly, maybe there's a case of saying the Dunherd champions are much better at that. Same for the Endwraith Stalkers. Now, these guys are a lot better in infantry, in melee, in infantry, but they are not much better when it comes to ranged prowess. Only 1 more missile damage. 4 is pretty decent though, honestly, for this submod. Like, the highest most factions will be able to muster of the good factions anyway, will be able to muster is probably around 6 for a composite bow unit. So 4 is honestly not too bad. So there is a case for saying that, you're probably going to want these in your army. But I would say don't go overboard on them. 2 I would say is enough, with maybe 2 Dunherd champions. This way you've got some of the long range of the archers and some of the close range punch of the javelins. And then you've got enough slots to really pad out your infantry line to make it so that you can outnumber your opponent in melee, hopefully. That's really what you're going to be wanting to go for as Dunland, because you're not going to win any skirmisher fights. Then you have the Dunland Huntsmen. These guys are javelins as well. They're essentially pretty similar to the Dunherd champions, except they're significantly worse in melee. They are a lot cheaper, but again, the majority of battles you're going to be playing in the overhaul mod are going to be high funds, so you might as well splash out on getting the Dunherd champions because they are just all round a better unit, although the missile damage is the same. So if you do need to save money anywhere, you could go for these, but again, they're really going to have no utility at all after they use their missiles because their stats are dreadful. 131 is not good at all. Next up we have a cheaper shock infantry essentially than the Eisenmach Axemen, and that's the Dunlanding Berserkers. Now, the main difference between the 2 units you'll notice is that the defense of the Berserkers is significantly less, as you might expect. They're really all about dealing damage, and they do a reasonable job at that. They're cheap as well for their sort of group of infantry, because shock infantry is now significantly better in this mod, but I kind of like these guys. They will pay for themselves pretty easily. 450 is not a lot of florins for you to spend on them, especially not with the amount of money you're likely to get in this submod. You can have 4 before the price increases, and then it's only 100 each time. So, yeah, I would suggest you use these guys as a sort of first line of attack, because they'll do damage, they'll undoubtedly die off, but they will pay for themselves quite easily. But do watch out against missiles, because naturally these guys aren't the most heavily armoured. It's kind of a trend with all of Dunland's units. None of them have got particularly heavy armour except probably 4 units, the Chieftain's Bodyguards, the Axemen, and these two, which we'll get onto in a minute. But yeah, these guys really sum up Dunland's aggression, really. They are pretty high damage for the mod, 9 attack is pretty decent, but they will die off, so use them wisely. But, you know, don't hold back on them. They are pretty good at taking walls in a siege as well. They're more than likely going to die off more easily in a pitched battle, though. Something that you will be using pretty much in every situation is the Noble Pikeman. Now, having a pike unit, as I've said before, is very important, and in this mod, just as important, really. They have pretty good stats. Their defense is good. Their armor is good, so they're not going to be terrible against archers, although, of course, you don't really want your pikes to be taking archer damage if at all possible. They are a pike unit and not a halberd unit, so they have the very long spears, which means you're going to want to keep them in formation anytime they're near a fight. Take them out of formation to run them into the fight, and then put them back in when they approach the fight, because out of formation pikes are very bad. Even with the defense score of 10, these guys are not going to be particularly effective. Their charge of 5 is interesting. I'm not sure how effective that charge will be, because pikes, when you take them out of formation and charge them in, tend to not do fantastically, at least in the vanilla version of the mod. I might have to test out how well these pikes do on the charge, but I'm guessing it's not very well, because if you have them out of formation, then they're not going to be able to do their pushing back effect that the pikes have. So I would suggest you don't charge these guys in. Use them as your main line, and they'll do a very good job for you. Next up, we have the most effective sword and shield unit that the Dunland can bring to bear. They might even be better than the axe. Well, no, the attack is significantly lower. But the Noble Swordsman. Now, these will make up the core of your survivable infantry. Most of your units are going to be more lightly armored, not going to survive as long as these guys. Really, only your Chieftain's Bodyguards are designed to last longer. They will basically perform the task of being a sword and shield unit very, very well. 730 is, you know, among the most expensive units that Dunland have to offer, so you're going to want to stack up on as much as these guys as possible, maybe even bring 5 if at all possible, if the funds allow it, because they will give your army the survivability it needs to go toe-to-toe with some of the more elite-focused factions. And that's really all there is to say about them. Sword and shield infantry, you know. Heavy infantry, probably just as important as it was in vanilla, because the survivability of units has gone up, which means they will last for a long, long time. I've also noticed it's more difficult to break units in this mod. You need to surround them, really, if you're going to break them or do a significant amount of damage to them. Now, the horse units of Dunland are obviously quite limited. These guys are, I believe, a javelin cavalry unit. Their missile damage is 11, which means I assume they are. This means their range is likely to not be brilliant. Nonetheless, they can do a significant amount of hit and run damage. I would say that shooting circle is not really recommended, because you'll be too close to the enemy and then they'll just charge into you. I would suggest that these guys only useful in a pitch battle. I would not use them in a siege because their range is just too low. You need to get them very close to the enemy army, and while it will distract them and harass them, as Dunland you're really going to need as much as possible on your infantry to sort of equalize against some of the elite focused factions like Arnor or the Dwarves. Nonetheless, it is a nice unit to have. Javelin cavalry can be very effective, as we've seen with the Muhad Beastmasters in the past, although these guys do not have the bonus versus cav, so use with caution, because horse archers require a lot of micro, these guys even more so because of how close you need to get in before they're effective. And then we have the Eisenmach Raiders. These guys are essentially just regular cavalry. They're basically just scout tier cav. They're not particularly fantastic when it comes to the charge. The charge is all important when it comes to shot cav, and they are not particularly good on the charge. Most units in this mod have got a bonus, or most heavy cav units have got a bonus when it comes to their charge, and 6 is really lagging behind now. So I would suggest that you only use these guys if you are facing off against a faction who you're sure is not bringing any cav. Something like the Dwarves might be a good faction, or the Elves even, because of how expensive their units are. But yeah, I would suggest caution when you're using these guys, because their stats are not brilliant when it comes to cavalry. And of course the ballista and the catapult will work the same. The only difference is in this submod, of course, you will have 4 artillery pieces per unit. So you'll have 4 ballistas when you select a ballista, and 4 catapults. This means that siege in general is going to be more effective, but you're going to need to be... Siege is honestly going to be limited to 1 artillery piece now per faction in a field battle, whereas before in vanilla it was 2 to make it balanced. Here though, this is a little bit ridiculous. You're just going to be able to shoot them down before they get to you, and it's more entertaining, I think, if you only have 1 siege per team, because otherwise it turns into really just a rock flinging contest and who gets lucky with breaking each other's siege. Anyway, I think it's time I'll select my army. Naturally, I'll have a chieftain's bodyguard for my general. I'll have 4 noble swordsmen, I think, and we'll have 4 Eisenmach axemen, or we might have 5 of these guys, actually. 5 axemen. We're going to want, I think, 3 champions, a couple of archers, 4, actually we'll get rid of one of the champions. We'll have 2 champions, 2 archers, 4 pikes, and then the other 2 units can be spears, because of course I am facing off against Rohan, and I have given Rohan some cavalry. So now we'll upgrade. We'll give everyone better weapons and armor. I must say I do like the look of Dunland units as well. They really captured the wildman aesthetic of what the faction should be all about. And the focus on being aggressive is something as well which is very fitting of the Dunlanders, and it's also something that in this mod is a lot more viable, which I like, because really in the vanilla mod the problem was that I would say that archers were a little bit too strong. And the nerf that they've been given across the board is a good thing, I think, because it lets you enjoy the battle a bit more. Makes it more about how well you maneuver your infantry, which I like. Okay, let's give my axemen a chevron each. Actually, no, I can't afford that. Okay, let's just give my general a couple of chevrons. And we'll give my spears a chevron each. A couple, because these guys are going to need to ward off the enemy cav. And can we have one more? No, we can't. Can we have... Yeah, we'll have that. Screw it. Okay, let's see if we can't get the AI to cooperate. And, right, okay, so they will be charging down the hill, so I think I'm going to need to give myself a little bit of breathing space. Go back a little bit, set up a front line with my pikes. They do have archers, so I'm going to need to have my archers nearby. Ideally, I'd put these guys out front in loose formation, but I'm just going to exploit the AI, I think, just for this demonstration. Naturally, this isn't going to be high-level play. I'm not exactly a high-level player as it is, and I will be needing to explain what I'm doing as I'm doing it. Multitasking, you know. Okay, so we'll have the spears out wide, because they do have cav, pretty good cav as well. I've given them a couple of units of Riders of the Westfold, in addition to having a Rohan bodyguard with them. And the General's bodyguard, you know, the charge bonus on it is pretty nasty, so gonna need to be careful of that. What have we still got over there? Dunherd champions. Have the Dunherd champions back here, I think. Okay. This is a pretty tight formation, but right, disable the fire at will. Want the champions to swing the infantry fight. The stalkers can be there. Yeah, sure. Right, they are moving in. Good, good, good. They do have some militia, but not many. They do have a pretty good infantry corps. They've got Riddermark axes, they've got dismounted Aerid lancers, they've got Royal Guard, they've got Riddermark axemen. So this is going to be a pretty strong Rohan army. There's a few gaps in it, but nonetheless, this is going to be a significantly decent army. Right, okay, so we do have their archers moving forward first, but they are in range of my stalkers, who are letting loose their arrows. Right, those guys are getting into loose. So let's target these. They're getting awfully close. Okay, so you guys can target each one now that... Okay, so because they're doing this, I'm just gonna move forward my line. Right, okay. Ooh, they're targeting my javelins. That's not good. AI, please. Lest you use tactics. Not a bad plan, honestly. I would certainly want to target the javelins if I were Rohan in this situation. Right, let's run you guys into the combat, shall we? Right, they are bracing. Right, okay. Oh my. Charging into the spears? How bold! Right, we don't want them surrounding us. So we'll send our Eisenmach Axemen over there. Charge in there, for fuck's sake. Get in. Victory is a distinct possibility after they charged into my spears, and I think they wrecked them actually. Yes, they did. 46. I wasn't paying too much attention there, which is unfortunate, but what can you do? Okay, so let's... Right, they are now stuck, so they're going to start to waver. My javelins are going to be ripping those riders of the Westfold apart. In fact, that's their general they've got in there, isn't it? No, their general's back there. Okay, so they're routing. Hold the line. Victory seems certain for them. I think we'll just charge in a couple of axemen anyway. We'll keep one in reserve. What are they doing with their archers? Oh, the spearmen came back. Okay, let's have you guys get over here then. Defeat is almost a certainty. Not great for them. The noble swords are holding very well. In sustained melee with the cavalry, they are going to do very well for themselves indeed. Right, target the dismounted royal guard. What are you guys doing? You target the royal kinsman. The javelins are still taking archer fire. Oh dear, this cavalry is getting itself torn apart. My pikes are going to win the frontline battle. Rohan still have no pikes, so this is a problem that they are going to have consistently. Right, they're coming in with their own cavalry. Target those Riddermarks. That cavalry is getting itself torn apart. They're going to just charge in and waste all their charge on their own militia. Very strange behaviour. This frontline fight is going to go my way. The Yawling swordsmen are not going to be able to go through the pikes. Those riders of the Westfold are not doing too well. Let's target the Royal Guard. He's going to send his general in. If I was facing another player, what they would undoubtedly be doing is sending their cavalry around to my rather weak backlines here. Right, these spearmen are now routing. Right, let's wrap around, shall we? Charging in with that cav again. It's not going to go too well. Especially not when they're under javelin fire. We still have my chieftain's bodyguard. They're warmed up, but they're still breaking. They're wasting all their charges on their own infantry line, which, again, the AI is not brilliant. So yeah, my line in the centre is holding very well. My noble swordsmen are also going to beat the yawling swordsman. Their cav is really the dangerous thing, and they've wasted most of it, so now they're charging into my pikes, really? That is not good for them. Right, okay, let's target his general with my javelins. This unit of javelins is out of ammunition, so I will now charge them into the melee. Pretty decent in melee. They're not fantastic, but they will do a good job at patching up any lines that may be breaking. None of my lines are actually breaking at the moment. In fact, I'm wrapping around over here. Okay, target the Royal Guard. Get as much damage done with my archers as I possibly can. They still have their own archers firing their missiles, and their archers are better than mine, which is why I'm surprised. Well, I'm not surprised actually, they haven't used them very well. Oh, you've got the Yawling Militia breaking. Right, okay. You two swordsmen. The axes can... Right, you charge into the bodyguards actually. If we can catch them in melee, this is all but over anyway, to be honest with you. Okay. Charge in. Get into those riders of the Westfold. Noble swords. Those bodyguards will soon break. Yeah, more breaking. Well, actually, no, they're retreating, it looks like. Interesting. They're sending in their riders of the Westfold again. No, they're not. They're going to pull away. The Rohan bodyguards are stuck in melee. That's not good for them. Oh, it looks like the cavalry is finally going to try going around. Far, far too late, but... You guys still have ammo? You do. Okay. Right, you guys actually get over there and attack the kinsman. Right. Wrap around with the pike line.
The enemy general abandons his men.
That should be it. At least for the most part. Most of the lower tier units will, well, most of the mid tier units at least are going to start to break. Right, let's kill this riders of the Westfold. They're the only ones that are remaining, I think. Noble swords, attack the Riddermarks. My axemen survived very well on the front lines, which is, you know, good. They're shock infantry, so survivability is something that you don't really associate with them. Arid Lancers breaking those kinsmen are eventually going to be run down. Not really a great deal they will be able to do about that. Now it's just a case of pursuing them off the field, really. Start charging out with my axes. And my champions, they still have units which are not broken. Okay, what about the pikes? Let's reform them into a line. Put them here. Get these guys moving up. What are they doing? What units do they still have that aren't broken? Oh, kinsmen. Perfect. Sooner or later they will fall. Get a close up here of my axemen taking on the swordsman. Probably Dunland's nicest looking unit, the Eisenmach axemen. That's a lot of axes. That's militia. We'll just flank them around. Dismounted lancers. Very depleted though. Where did all their royal guard go? Did it just get evaporated? Those guys are all breaking. Noble swordsman. The kinsman. Let's get these guys up there. You know what? Fuck it. The pikes don't really need to be in formation anymore. Oh, they did come back, my spears. Good. They're not dead yet? Kinsmen are broken. Good lord. They just refuse to break.
Behold,
And there we go.
cowardly foe
Excellent. So, let's have a look at the
clear victory.
kill statistics. This is going to be more like what you would see in a real battle if you did well as Dunland, unlike the previous overviews where I was against a horde. So you'll see that again the archers did very well, but the primary damage was actually done by my axemen. So they did very, very well on the front lines dealing with mid-tier infantry. They'll do reasonably well against high-tier infantry as well, but they can be overpowered by some of the very elite units, so you might want to watch out for that. They were supported by the pikes as well, which, you know, some of the pikemen got a decent amount of kills for a pike unit in this situation anyway. The chieftain's bodyguard got no kills, but then I didn't need to commit him. He will do very well in melee, but he can be overwhelmed because of the amount of men in his unit. But yes, that's Dunland. They are a pretty savage faction in melee. They can be outmuscled at extreme range, and they can be bullied with cavalry. But aside from that, if you like aggressive infantry plays, you're going to like Dunland. Nonetheless, I would say they are one of the lower tier factions in this mod, but all of the factions are more usable in this submod than they are in vanilla, I think. The weakest faction in this submod is closer to the strongest faction in this submod than it was in vanilla, for example. But yes, that was Dunland. Next up I will do the Elves of the Woodland Realms, and from there we'll play it by ear, because from there it will be me redoing the factions of vanilla with all their differences.